Check, check. All right, metahumans. So let's go over to Unreal. And after you create a metahuman using the metahuman creator, which, I'm not spending time today to making, what was her name? I forget her name. Amelia? Slightly more pale and longer hair Amelia than the default now, but I'm not really going to save her or anything. But it auto saves and then it pops up in another place in Unreal Engine that you may or may not know about already. Unreal Engine's gone through some growing pains in the last 6 months. They've been switching over from a couple of different old ways to do things. They've introduced Fab instead of the marketplace in the launcher. They've gotten rid of this thing called Quixel Bridge, but we're still semi-using some of this stuff today, which makes sense to me because I know it, but it's also kind of annoying because there's a couple different places now. All right, so in Unreal Engine, I just have a basic project open. There's no metahuman in here at all yet. Actually, there might be. Nope, there isn't. All right, so first thing you want to do is you go up to the Quickly Add button and go down to Quixel Bridge. Quixel Bridge, the current way to do this, you just say stay here, pull some of this down. It has a section over on the left that says metahumans. This is where all of your metahumans would be. This is where the preset metahumans are. These are all the presets. I'm just going to use a preset today. Am I logged in? I am logged in. Oh, there, but my metahumans. I've really not made many metahumans before. Looks like some of my old ones are deleted now. But your metahumans that you create in the web portal would be in my metahumans. Presets, let's just use Amelia again, because that's what I'd been using. So you probably want to use the highest quality, which is a cinematic. Some of them are only cinematic. And then you're going to need to download it, which could take a while. And then you're going to want to add it, which could also take a little while. So let's try it. Add. Could also be very fast. When you add it to your project, which project's going to add to? Well, I opened Quixel Bridge from this project, so it's going to add it to this one. Here I have a MetaHumans folder now added very quick. And then I have an Amelia folder along with some other things. So first, let's just generally talk about metahumans. So I'm going to click into the Amelia folder. If you get a different metahuman, it's probably going to be named whatever their name is. So in the Amelia folder, as is with all metahumans, there's a blueprint underscore their name. Blueprints in Unreal are something that we really haven't talked about much. They have tons of functionality, but for this case, think of a blueprint kind of like a folder of different assets that are combined together. Perhaps if you've used Unity before, you may have heard of prefabs. A prefab can be comprised of multiple different elements, multiple different meshes that come together as a group. In the case of this metahuman, metahumans are comprised of a couple different meshes, which we can see here if I double click on this blueprint. First time. Well, first time you open human stuff, not necessarily when you import it for the first time, but when you start to use it, it's going to tell you a lot of these things. You're missing the plugins. You need these project settings turned on. Turn all that stuff on because it's going to make things look better. So enable missing. There should be another pop-up here. It's going to tell me about my project settings. Enable all that stuff. You're most likely going to have to save and restart the engine. But your metahuman might look a little strange if you don't enable that stuff. Also, you can see that my Unreal is now frozen and I'm stuck at 100%. It's all right. Just be patient. Don't freak out. Some people would already force shut down the laptop. Just be patient. It should be okay. There we go. All right. So I don't think we've really looked at blueprints before. Oh, here's the other pop-up. This is telling me I'm missing plugins and I'm also missing some project settings. The easiest thing to do is just to click both enable missing buttons, because otherwise you're gonna have to manually go in and toggle these things on, which is more difficult to do. So just enable and enable. Yep, and now it says you need to restart. I will restart momentarily, but I'm kind of on a roll right now. So here's the MetaHuman. Looks pretty good. The hair looks great. So in blueprints, they have these little tabs up top. The viewport lets you see the stuff that is in the viewport in the blueprint. The event graph is where you would have any sort of programmatic stuff, which I think there is some in here, but we don't really need to worry about this. So don't worry about that right now. Over on the top left is the component view, which is like an outliner view of everything that is in this blueprint. So inside this blueprint, I have a couple different skeletal meshes, which have the little skeleton icon next to them. Every single one of these things is a separate skeletal mesh. So if I was to, click on the body here, and then I go over on the details panel, this is the body. I don't know if you can tell from the thumbnail. If I open this up, if I double click this and open it up, this is Amelia's body. Why does it look like this? Seems like there's some stuff missing. Just a little bit of stuff missing. This is correct, but why would the body look like this? Any ideas? This is not just a MetaHuman thing. This is a usual 3D character thing. Why is most of their body missing? Why do we only see her ankles and her hands? Doesn't have anything to do with joints. It's more of a obvious visibility thing. What do you wear on top of your body? Clothes, right? So unless Amelia is changing clothes or getting nude or something, I don't really need to see the rest of her body. Why would I waste computational power rendering those polygons when I'm never going to see them? Unless there's some sort of bathing scene or something that happens in your game or your project or whatever. Right? The only skin that we actually see on Amelia's body is her hand and her wrist. This isn't true for every metahuman. Some metahumans are wearing, I don't know about like sandals, or bare feet, maybe. Some are wearing boots, so you might not even see the ankles. I don't think any are wearing gloves, but some are wearing short sleeves, so the body might look a little bit different. But the point is that this blueprint is comprised of a couple different things. If I look at Amelia's feet here, the skeletal mesh for the feet is not her feet, it's just the shoes, because I never see her feet. And so on for the rest of this stuff here. Her face skeletal mesh, which you can kind of see outlined there in yellow. This is her face skeletal mesh. The faces and the bodies are separated from each other in metahumans, which can be a challenge if you are trying to retarget them, especially knowing what we know about motion builders so far. There are a couple different ways to retarget metahumans. I'm going to show you one of them today, sticking predominantly in Unreal. We do a couple things in Motion Builder, but we're going to do the actual retargeting in Unreal itself. which is kind of exciting because it's a newer feature. So the reason for these things being separate is because the head actually has a separate skeleton that has a whole face rig associated with it. This is the skeleton for the head. It's a little complicated, doesn't it? There's just a couple joints here. Also, there are what are called morph shapes or blend shapes to animate the face. No, that one's not going to work. We'll be able to play around with, hopefully we'll be able to do some facial animation today. We'll see. So all these meshes come together to make up this blueprint of this character, Amelia. There's also the hair. Eyelashes, eyebrows, hair. If she has a mustache or a beard, like peach fuzz on the body hair sort of stuff. All of that is within this blueprint. So when you drag, you don't really need to mess around with the blueprint much. I'm just kind of showing you how things are put together. But the point is that we are dragging and using the blueprint in our project. We're not using the actual meshes. Because if you use the actual meshes, you're just going to have, like wrists and ankles and a floating head. You're not going to have the whole thing together. All right, so here's Amelia in my world doing an A pose. Hooray. I'm going to go ahead and save this and restart since I turned on those plugins. Any questions while we're restarting? Oh, this guy's very serious. Also, with the MetaHuman Creator, the website, don't walk away from the computer because it will boot you after a couple minutes of idle activity, which can be annoying because it might take you a little bit of time getting back in, depending on how much traffic there is. All right, so we used a preset MetaHuman. We talked about where to make them at. We talked about where to get them at. We talked about how to drag them into the level using their blueprint that's associated with them. Let's check out a couple other things before we get into the motion capture part of this. Sometimes it takes a little bit for them to import. Actually, I already have a map. Let's go back to my map. Looks a little bit better now that my settings are all on. Okay, so metahumans are fully rigged characters that you can animate or put animation on in Unreal Engine. They also have control rigs on them. We've used control rigs in Motion Builder before as kind of an intermediate step to do fixing of our joint animations in Motion Builder. Metahumans also have control rigs on them that we can animate without any motion capture at all. If I go up to just add a level sequence like we would for anything in Unreal, and I drag my blueprint into my sequence, my screen should change a little bit here. All right. As soon as I drag that blueprint in there, you notice I'm now dragging a marquee selection instead of trying to navigate around my world with left click. If I want to navigate around my world now, I need to use my Alt button on my keyboard, just like we do in Motion Builder. The traditional controls no longer work. Why is that? Because I'm no longer in selection mode, I am in animation mode. If you want to go back to selection mode, you can just pick selection mode up top. But then you will lose visibility of all of the control rigs. So know that that's a possibility. Animation mode. So in Sequencer, I have the body that I can animate, and I have a control rig, and then I have a list of all of the different joints that are in this character, which I can control the rotations of and set keyframes for to animate. If I wanted to just animate this character straight up, I could. It's going to be a lot more work than motion capture, but you totally can. For instance, let's why don't we rotate her head this way, and then we set a keyframe for the head, and then we set another one at, I don't know, 60 seconds for the same thing. And then at 30 seconds, I'm going to rotate it completely to the other side, so she should lean her head from side to side. When I play this, hooray, very exciting. So you can manually animate this entire character if you wanted to. You could also animate the head if you wanted to. This is kind of neat. So here we have the controls for the body, these blue and orange and red controls. And then over on the side of her are controls for the face. So you could get the joints in Sequencer here, but you could also just select them here. So if I get the two, I think this is the blink, if I recall correctly. Oops. I get this one, and I get this one. Blinky blink. So I could animate the blinks as well. This is going to be the most exciting animation I've ever made in my life. Eyes closed. Oh my gosh, look at that. Final project complete. So now do this for all the other joints. For your 2-minute film or however long it is. We haven't talked about motion capture yet, but we could also take our motion capture and then modify it in Unreal Engine with these controls as well. Just like we use the control rig in Motion Builder, because MetaHumans have control rigs in Unreal, we could do those modifications in Unreal Engine as well, which is pretty neat. You could also do, you could animate the fingers in Unreal Engine. You could animate the face in Unreal Engine without motion capture. You can make tweaks to things using the control rig. This is not a very deep dive about how to use control rig in Unreal Engine, but I'm happy to point you in the right direction of stuff if you want to go down this road more. There's tons of tutorials on this stuff now as well on YouTube. But this stuff is pretty cool. I think this is relatively new in the last couple versions of Unreal Engine, and we're just getting started here. Any general questions about this stuff? No? Okay. So let's just sit that tight right there. Now I want to start bringing in motion capture. So what I'm showing you now is one very narrow way for how to put motion capture on from Motive onto a MetaHuman. There are a couple different other ways to do it. We could do everything in Motion Builder, but I find it a little bit more tedious. I have a more streamlined way that I think works pretty well, especially for more novice 3D and Unreal people. But some of these things might be redundant if you go about things the other way. So I'm on the OptiTrack download page. Just Google OptiTrack Unreal Engine plugin, and I ended up here. This is the plugin that we need to do live motion capture downstairs in the ballrooms. But I'm going to download and install this because I want access to the Motive avatar. So I'm going to go ahead and download this. I don't think I have it on this computer. You don't need Motive for what I'm going to show you right now. This is just, we're just getting an avatar from here. So the process that we're going to do is we're going to open up Motion Builder, and we're going to use kind of a placeholder character. Our placeholder character is going to be not the MetaHuman in my process. Placeholder character is going to be the Motive avatar, like the suit-wearing avatar that we see downstairs in the ballrooms. So I've downloaded this plugin, and I don't happen to have it installed on my computer here. So I'm going to show you where to install it. So I need to get this OptiTrack Live Link folder. And keep in mind that this is Unreal Engine version specific. So right now, this is a plugin for version 5.5. There are previous releases here that you can get as well. I'm using 5.5, so that's fine. But just know that that's a thing. So I'm going to get this folder right here. And rather than unzipping, I'm just going to copy it. And then I'm going to go to my program files. This is maybe different on a Mac, if it will work on a Mac at all, I'm not sure. But go into Program Files, Epic Games, find your version of Unreal Engine, 5.5. Not sure why I still have 5.0 installed. Engine, plugins. This is the folder hierarchy that we're going into. C, Program Files, Epic Games, Unreal Engine 5.5, Engine, Plugins. I'm going to paste that folder into the plugins folder. So now any project that you make with Unreal Engine 5.5 will have this plugin already installed to it. When 5.6 comes out, you'll have to do this again, should you want to do this at all again. Now I have the plugin folder right there. So it's probably not going to show in my plugins folder now. Yeah, so see, it's not here because I have Unreal Engine open. But if I shut down Unreal Engine again, open it back up again, I'm going to have to turn on that plugin for OptiTrack. Then I'm going to have to restart Unreal Engine again, and then we'll be good. So now turn on the plugin, settings, plugins, you just type in OptiTrack. We want to turn on OptiTrack Live Link. This is going to give us access to the avatar asset. And as always, when you turn on plugins, it says you must restart Unreal Editor for this to take effect. So go ahead and restart. So after you do this, you could do live motion capture into Unreal Engine with OptiTrack mocap cameras. But we're not using it for that. In this particular case, we're just getting the avatar. And I try to streamline things as much as possible for y'all because I know most of you don't have a huge understanding of the fundamentals. but there are other ways to do this as well. All right, so where do we get the avatar? So over here in your content browser in Engine plugins, if you don't see this, you can go over to settings in your content browser and say show engine and plugin content. If you don't have these checked, it's not going to show because this is a little bit of a, an advanced feature. This isn't shown by default. So in the plugins folder, if I expand that, I'm looking for I think it's called the OptiTrack folder. I don't think it's called Motive. If I scroll down, there's lots of different stuff here. Scroll down to OptiTrack Live Link content. Yes. Inside here, in the animation folder, there are two different avatars, the male and female avatars. If I open one of these up, you should see our friendly, suited up avatar here. This is what I'm calling our placeholder avatar. Because at the end of the day, I'm just trying to get my mocap onto the MetaHuman. I don't really care about this avatar right here at all. But this is a transitionary step that we have to take because you can't just import animation into Unreal Engine. It needs to have a mesh or a skeleton associated with it. So I need to put it on something in Motion Builder. I need to put my custom motion capture in Motion Builder on something so that I can bring it into Unreal Engine. So why am I using the Motive avatar rather than some OptiTrack avatar? Well, that's a good question. And I used to show this by using a Ready Player Me avatar or a Mixamo avatar. But it was kind of an extra step because the skeletons coming out of Mixamo were slightly different than the Motive skeleton for our custom motion capture. The skeleton of this character is supposed to be exactly like what we're recording in the ballrooms. It doesn't have all those extra metahuman joints. It doesn't have the Mixamo skeleton is slightly different. The Mixamo skeleton doesn't have a root bone, which is problematic. There is one extra thing that we'll have to do in Motion Builder to make it exactly the same, but I've kind of streamlined this process a little bit more for you here, although it may not seem like it because there's still a lot of steps. So I'm going to export this skeleton as an FBX file that I can use in Motion Builder. So right-click on the skeletal mesh. I think this is called SKM female. I don't know. Let's just look what it's called. SKM female underscore motive avatar underscore OptiTrack. If your metahuman is going to be, have the proportions more of a dude, then maybe pick the male one. But I don't think it really matters that much. But you might as well pick the closest body type to what you are trying to do with your metahuman. So right-click on that, Asset Actions, Export. Right-click, Asset Actions, Export. And then choose somewhere to save it. Just going to create a new folder on my desktop. All right, save. That stuff's all right. I don't really need the morph targets, but I don't think it's going to matter that much. We'll just click export. You could also export the texture. You don't really need to see the texture in Motion Builder, but I don't know if it bothers you that it doesn't have a texture. I'll show you how to put it on. So same thing, we got to right-click on the texture here. We don't really need the normal map. We just get the diffuse texture. Right-click, Asset Actions, Export. Save again. This is just the graphic of the suit. You were bringing this back into Unreal, and also we're not really even going to use it in the end, so putting the texture on it doesn't matter that much, but I'll still show it to you. Okay. Now we jump over to Motion Builder. Still recording. All right, in Motion Builder, let's go ahead and open up that FBX file. So File, Open, wherever I created that folder at. What should I call it? There it is. Don't save. Open. All right, there's a character with no texture on. If I do want to put the texture on, I can import it in Motion Builder. It's a little silly that in Motion Builder calls textures, even if they're still textures, it still calls them videos. So if you right click on the videos, you can go to Insert Video, and then just browse to wherever you saved out that, I think it's a PNG file. And then it should import down there. You double click it, you can see it. And you should just be able to drag it onto your character. Oops, I don't think. Click, drag it onto my character. And it's going to say attach texture to material. Yep. Drag it on, attach texture to material. But still looks like it doesn't have a texture. That's okay, because textures are turned off by default in order to save on processing time. So if you want to turn on textures, you go to Display, Model Display. You got a couple different options that you can use here. Textures and shaders is what I want to turn on. Hooray. Now they are suited up again. We go ahead and save this just as an intermediate step. Motion Builder, step 1. In case we mess things up. Remember, Motion Builder is fairly unforgiving when it comes to undoing, so it's good to save out at incremental steps, I find. Unless you like to cry. Okay, so now this is what we've done in Motion Builder before. There's nothing new at this point after we've done that. So I need to get some motion capture. I don't know if I have any motion capture downloaded. I might from last time. I seem to remember, I think Super Shy that's raw motion capture, right? Whose group was that? That's like straight out of Motive, right? Okay. Let's do the Super Shy. There's always the first motion capture volunteered in class becomes the only motion capture that I ever use in demos every semester. I'm just going to, whatever, we'll keep the whole thing. Why not? No, it's really long, isn't it? All right, maybe I'll just put 2000 here so it only imports 0 to 2000 instead of 2 million or whatever. Oh no, graphical glitch. Oh, not on TV, but for me, I have a graphical glitch right now. Yeah. My viewport is split horizontally down the middle, and it's frozen in the top, but unfrozen in the bottom. Have you seen that before? On here? So Motion Builder is a piece of trash program. But I am recording and doing HDMI at the same time, so maybe that's why. But oh, it's fine now. Just clicking off and then clicking back on. Everything looked fine on TV, but for me, it was difficult to do. All right, back to normal. So yeah, there was 2 performers here. Sorry, I'm gonna get rid of one of you. delete this. Again, this is nothing that we haven't done already up to this point. There is something new that we want to do now, though. So this hierarchy right here. So see the root top level hierarchy? Underneath that is the rest of the skeleton, right? For my motive avatar. But root is not the top level of that hierarchy. There's actually this little null object here, the skm underscore f underscore motive avatar. That causes a problem when I import it into Unreal Engine and I want it to use the same skeleton. It says it's a different skeleton. So I'm actually going to delete that and show you how to do that right now. It's pretty easy. So in Motion Builder, go ahead and select the root and then just right click on it and go to Unparent and Confirm. So right click, Unparent, Confirm. That will unparent it from skm underscore f. And I'm just going to delete that. There was another, not a joint, but like a null object that root was parented to. So when I imported it into Unreal, and in Unreal, I'm not going to say create a new skeleton, which is what we've done in the past. I'm going to say use the existing OptiTrack skeleton that is in the plugin folder in Unreal Engine, because we saw that already. It's there. And I don't know, for whatever reason, when I export it, it creates something else. I don't know why. We could create our own skeleton, but that I'm trying to save you work and steps. So you kind of have to trust me at this point, because right now it seems like I'm making more work for you, but it will make more sense in like 5 minutes. Trust me. So I just deleted that. Don't delete this one, because this is your mesh. If you delete that, then you will no longer see avatar. So now I have the root is the top level. And if I expand, oops, I'm going to unselect that, expand branches, there's the whole skeleton, just like we've seen before. So now, again, after we've unparented that, it's the same thing what we've done before, coming from Mixamo and using one of those characters. What's the next step in the process? Characterize it, exactly. Same stuff now. So first things first, let's characterize, I guess let's characterize the character, right? So we're not characterizing the root, we're characterizing the pelvis or the hips. And this is another new thing that you're going to see here in a second. Because what did I call this? I didn't call this hips, I called this pelvis. Because Unreal Engine likes to name things differently than Motive and Mixamo. And the names are kind of arbitrary, but Motion Builder by default is expecting a certain naming convention. And as soon as I drag the character onto the pelvis, or the hips in this case, it's going to complain. Characterize. Characterization process could not be completed because some of the required bones are missing and do not follow naming conventions. Click OK to see a list of what's missing. What's missing is pretty much everything besides the fingers. And you're like, no, the hips are right there. They're just called pelvis. And actually leg up is called, thigh underscore R instead of leg up left. When this is the case, it's not a big deal. What it means is that you just have to characterize it manually, which is a little bit of a tedious but easy process. So let's go ahead and do that fun. So when I click OK, I'm going to get this window over on the right here. And if you don't see this, you want to click on the definition tab. And if you don't see the definition tab, you want to make sure that you're selecting character. Your character is just the default name for the first thing that you characterize, right? So it just happens to be called character right now. You want character to be character unless you renamed it to something else. I'm going to keep it that name. And then you want to click on the definition tab here. Then we're going to need to go through each of these bones and tell it what the hips are. So I'm going to go in and select the hip bone, or the hip bone currently known as the pelvis bone, and then go over here and right-click on the hips and assign it. So right-click, assign selected bone. So we're manually characterizing. We're saying this bone, which is currently called pelvis, is actually should be treated as the hips. Okay? Does that make sense? Select the joint, go over to the definition panel, right-click on the joint that you want to assign it to, assign to joint. Doesn't really matter what it's called anymore. We're telling Motion Builder to disregard those names and use these names. I guess you could hypothetically rename these joints in Unreal Engine or some other 3D program, but this is kind of doing the same thing, just without renaming them. Now this is kind of tedious to do. Luckily, the bodies are symmetrical, so you don't have to do each side. So I'm going to select the right upper leg, right-click over here, assign, and see it assigns both of them rather than having to do this twice as many times. Get the lower leg, go over to right leg, right-click, assign bone. Get the bottom foot, go over to the foot, right-click, assign bone. It can get tricky when you have the spine. So the skeletons here are pretty much, they're exactly the same. It's just they're called different things. Okay? So this is spine. This happens to be called in the export from Unreal Engine. It's called spine 1. And then there's also a spine 2 that's attached to it. And then the neck is attached to spine 2 and the head is attached to the neck. Spine 1, I want to assign to that top green one there. And it actually said, hey, we automatically assigned spine 2 to this. Are you sure? Yes, Motion Builder, I know what I'm doing. And then I also can click on this little arrow right here to go into spine view, because depending on how nuanced your character is, it might have a lot more spine bones. Just like we don't have one spine joint, right? We don't have one vertebra. We have, I don't know how many we have. We have a lot. So I'm going to assign spine 2 to the bottom one here, which Motion Builder calls spine 1. And I'm going to close out of this. So the first spine joint, I'm making this, and then I'm putting spine 2 in there. Does that make sense? All right. What else do we got here? This is called the clavicle in Unreal. So the clavicle is located in the little shoulder drop-down menu here. So if I click the shoulder drop-down, it will go into shoulder view. And then we have shoulder extra and right shoulder. Clavicle is shoulder, not shoulder extra, shoulder. Assign bone, close that down. We don't have a shoulder extra. Click on the upper arm, put it for right arm. Click on the lower arm, put it for forearm. Go to the hand and put it for the hand. Did this have finger motion capture? It does? Oh, what the heck? We can do it. So there is also the hidden menu right there to toggle to get the finger view. Oh, even more joints to assign. Look at this fun stuff. So I don't even know what this is. Thumb joint 1, I guess. Yes, and then there's multiple thumb joints. So I'm going to right click on the first thumb joint, assign. I'm going to right click on, or I'm going to left click on the next thumb joint, assign. And I guess I'll do thumb joint 3. Sure. If you don't have fingers, then you don't really need to do this. You're just wasting your time because there's no animation. There's nothing to retarget anyways. But if you do have hand animation, then you kind of need to do this. Either one. If you have, like if you're just doing the core 50, I forget what the one with the hands is called, but the one with much more markers. Like if you have the individual fingers, you have to do this. And if you have the claw hands, you have to do this. If you don't do it, you're just going to get this, paddle hands, which you could then animate afterwards with a control rig. But the point is that you don't have to retarget them, so you don't need to assign the joints because there's no animation on there anyways. I'm going to be pretty upset if I go through this and there's no animation on the hands. So I'm just going through and quickly assigning, clicking the joint for the pinky, second joint, third joint, and then closing down. This one? In the hands? Oh, that is the part of the hips. Yeah. The hips and then spine 1 and then spine 2. Yeah, I actually think that sometimes too. Because the hips can, depending on the character, like the Mixamo characters, they had more of a triangular hips rather than this, I don't know what you would call that, like an upside down T. Another thing that I forgot to, now everything's retargeted now. Or not retargeted, but defined. And even the left hand too, so I don't have to do the left hand. It's symmetrical, so it doesn't. I forgot one thing though. I forgot the root joint down here. So don't forget to do the root, the top level. It's called root. So right click, assign. I'm going to go ahead and save this again. It's not really step 2 anymore, but we'll just call it step 2. All right. You may get a warning here. Yellow is just a warning. It says that the arms aren't parallel to the x-axis. It's something to take note of, but I don't think it's that big of a deal. They do seem pretty parallel to me, so I'm just going to ignore it. You would also get this warning if the arms were super twisted though too. So, just make a note of it. After you do all of this and you are finished, only when you're finished, click the lock. That will freeze everything. And now it's going to get this pop-up for when we normally characterize things. Is this a biped facing positive Z? It is. All right. So now that character is defined. So a lot more of a process than what we've done before. Still the good thing to know. It's good to know how to manually define things in Motion Builder even without doing anything with MetaHumans. It's kind of a core thing to know in Motion Builder that we didn't have to do yet this semester. If you have a much more complex character that has a lot more joints, it's not going to auto-characterize because Motion Builder might get confused. So you might have to manually do what we just did. Or if your naming conventions are different, you have to do this. If you go and get a character from some random 3D place on the internet that you purchase, you can't control what the person that made that called their skeleton joints. So this is a very likely possibility that you'll have to manually define it too, whether you're doing metahumans or not. It's a good thing to know. Is there questions about that? All right, now the next step is, it's funny, y'all are used to just select the hips, characterize, select the hips, characterize, done. Not anymore. All because it's not named what Motion Builder is expecting. So I click the lock on the definition. Now I'm going to mess with my motion capture data. So I'm going to select the top level of the mocap data. I'm going to right click on it, select branches, because we're going to zero it out, right? Just like we've done before. Right click now that they're all selected, go to 0, go to rotation, just straightens it up a little bit. All right, this skeleton is very straight. This skeleton was close to T-pose, but not perfectly straight. The closer you match these skeletons, the better results you will get. Notice there is some discrepancy still with the thumb versus the thumb here. I'm not going to take the time to correct that right now, but just note that that is a thing. Remember the weird results we got when we set a T-pose when it was actually an A-pose? The arms were like waving around like this. You can end up with some weird results. All right, so I zeroed that out. Now I'm going to select the hips, dragged character onto the hips, characterize, yes, biped. And now I'll go ahead and save again because I'm cautious like that. And now we should just be able to select in our character up top. Our character is the motive avatar that is driven by the source of character 1. Bam. This is not that big of a surprise. We've done this before. We've just added more steps now. We need to get this onto a metahuman. Now, a lot of the tutorials, if you go and look up others on YouTube, I'll be very, very offended personally that you look up other people's tutorials on YouTube. But I understand. There's a lot of other different ways, not a lot, like 2 other different ways to retarget metahumans from Motion Builder. One is exporting the entire metahuman to Motion Builder and then re-exporting it back. I found that a little bit tedious because of all the different pieces. So what I'm trying to say is this is just one way, okay? I have actually not found this way anywhere else on YouTube. So not yet until I upload this video. But I think this is easier for you, but maybe not. There are caveats with both ways. So, I'm just trying to show you the best way. Here's see that thumb is a little wonky because I didn't fix it. Oh well, good enough for now. Okay, now the next step is to either bake it to a skeleton or control rig. We've talked about control rigs before in Motion Builder. I'm just going to bake this straight to a skeleton and get back into Unreal. So it's baked. File, save as. I'll call this Motion Builder to Unreal. Save. And then jump back to Unreal. All right. So we exported that. Now we need to import it. So I'm going to create a new folder for it. I'm going to import it. There's nothing new here. I'm going to get my FBX file. Now I am going to do something new here. I'm going to say import only animations. So I'm going to use the existing skeletal mesh of that motive avatar that's already in Unreal Engine. I don't need to create a new one. I could create a new one, but then I'll show you in 5 minutes some extra steps that you'll have to do if you do that. Import only animations, and then I also want to use the existing skeleton. Usually you leave this none, so it creates a new one, unless you're adding additional animations to the same character. So import only animations, and I'm going to type in OptiTrack. There's 2 of them in here. I'm not using the X forward one, I'm using the top one. OptiTrack. What else? Make sure import animations is checked. I think this motion capture was giving me the problem with the frame rate, so I'm going to snap to closest frame rate boundary. Good, let's see what happens. Import. There were issues with the import. No smoothing, that's fine. They're just warnings, they're not red. Look at that, it imported an animation sequence that kind of looks like Shy Take One, Super Shy, or whatever it's called. If I double click this, there's our animation. That's great. Nothing really super groundbreaking at this point. We still don't have it on our MetaHuman at all. We imported our MetaHuman and then we did nothing with it for the last 45 minutes. Now is where the magic starts to happen. And by magic, I mean really annoying, tedious process. And then the magic happens. Check, check. So in Unreal Engine, I want you to create a new file. You right click, or you can go to add, and you go to animation, retargeting, IK retargeter. Right click, animation, retargeting, IK retargeter. And I'm going to call this MetaHuman retargeter. And I'm going to open this up. And there doesn't appear to be anything in here. What this window does is I'm going to tell it, this is the source and this is the target. My source is the motion builder skeletal mesh that now has your motion capture on it, right? That is the source. So like the source and the target window motion builder too. Same sort of idea. We're going to have a source and we're going to put it on the target. The target is the MetaHuman. Okay? In order to do that, we need to assign a skeletal mesh, which is the pink one, for both things, the MetaHuman and the motion or motive avatar. But then we also need to assign this thing called IK-Rig asset. And this is the thing that you would have to manually create if not for the genius of your professor and saving you time. By using the pre-existing ones here, I'm saving you time in having to create this file. This file is still a useful thing to know how it works, so we're going to take a peek at it real quick. So for source IK-Rig, I'm going to type in, I can't type it in when I'm zoomed in, I'm going to type in OptiTrack, and then there's one listed here, an IK-Rig. I'm going to pick the top one. Oh, OptiTrack. And it also manually or automatically picks the motive avatar too. If I was to double click on this IK-Rig up top, it will take me into a brand new window called the IK-Rig window or whatever. I don't know what it's called. In here, thanks to your lovely teacher telling you about this existing already, this skeletal mesh has already been defined. And by defined, I mean having its joints given names. Because what we have to do ultimately is say that the root joint on this character is going to be the root joint on the metahuman. And the spine joints on this character are going to be the spine joints on the metahuman. And the head joint here is going to be the head joint there. And the left leg here is going to be the left leg there. Same sort of thing that we just did in Motion Builder, except now we're doing it in Unreal. And now we're doing it for the metahuman. The difference is that metahumans, which I can go ahead and put in here as well, for the metahuman for the target, I want to pick this metahuman underscore F. I think SRT is for short and narrow, maybe. You get different metahuman bodies depending on if your character is larger or taller, or male or female. So pick whichever one's appropriate for your character. In my case, I only have one metahuman in here, so it's this one. And it also brings in the mesh. If I go into the IK rig for this asset, metahumans have a lot more bones. A lot more stuff going on. A lot more stuff. This window is much bigger here. Luckily, this has already been created for us. We could go in and manually create this. And if you had a custom character, you would have to go in and manually create this, similar to how we did in Motion Builder. But because I'm such a lovely person, I'm telling you how this is already done for most of what you need to do if you're using metahumans coming from motive motion capture data. So we don't need to create this file. We don't need to create either of these two files. But we do need to create the retargeter file that connects them together. So not the IK-rig file, which is these yellow ones, but we do need to create the retargeter, which is the blue one. And we have done this already. Let's drag these up here. So this was the retargeter file. The IK retargeter was what I created already. So now that I've plugged both of the source and the target in here, they are both here in the window. Notice that they are on top of each other right now, which can be useful, but also cannot be useful. You can set the preview settings. You can set an offset for the target mesh. If I drag it in the X value, I can drag it to the side. So I just made this negative 94. I could also increase the scale. Maybe I'll take the offset away again by putting 0 in, and I'll scale it up to something close to appropriate. Oh, also notice that it's decapitated. Ignore that, because we're not putting motion capture on the head. The head is driven by the head joint of the skeleton of the body, right? The face is the only thing that's important on the actual face skeletal mesh, but we have not dealt with that yet, and we will see if we have time for that today. Floppy wrists? Good question. That's just the pose that this body is in. I'm not entirely sure why. We're gonna have to fix it though in a second. The closer it is to the pose that you're it depends on the retargeting pose too. The closer it is to the pose that you're retargeting to, the better. Ideally, those skeletons would be identical. You could lay them on top of each other and they would be identical. Is it worth your time to go in there and be super crazy about it? It depends on what the project is and the character, etc., etc. And also, you can always just zero out that data anyways. So it doesn't even really matter if you do a T-pose ultimately, because you can just say 0 and then characterize in Motion Builder, right? It's like this group had a T-pose in the beginning, right? This is the T-pose. This is the zeroed out T-pose. Just kind of drops the shoulders a little bit, which could be problematic or not. Does that answer your question? No problem. But the same thing holds true here. Before we transfer this animation data to the MetaHuman, we want to get this body as close as possible to our source. So right now, the arms are pretty good. Actually, let me zero out the offset again. The legs, maybe we can zero this out too, and I'll show you how. So over here on the left, see it says current retarget pose, default pose. I can use this create button to create a modified pose with the not bent down wrists. So if I click create, 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 whatever you want to call it, I'll just call it that. Now it goes back to an A pose actually, because it was trying to match this. That's why I got the floppy wrists, because the arms were actually bent down too, and they are a little bent here as well. So when it retargeted it to this T-pose, that's what made the wrists screw up. So now we're going to manually put these arms in position. Maybe not manually. Let's try auto align first. So now I'm in current retarget pose custom because I did create. I'm going to try to do the auto align button and see how this works. I love these features in Unreal. They're making things a little bit easier, but sometimes this fails miserably. Oh, look at that. Let's lay this over top and see the difference between the two right now. So one, the legs are a little bit different. The feet are turned out. Obviously, it's in an A pose. That's different. If I click the auto align button, align all bones, it turns those feet in. Maybe we could do a little bit more, but I guess that's all right for now. It's a pretty decent T pose now. This is where going into the different view modes would be a good idea. Looking at it from a top or a left or front view. If I look at it from the front view, front is actually the side apparently. Right happens to be front. Or look at it from the top view. Or just eyeball it from the perspective view. So that looks a lot better now. Maybe it's slightly too big. That looks pretty good. So now's the moment of truth. I can go ahead and save this. And if I go down to the bottom here, I wasn't looking in chain mapping. Now I'm looking in asset browser. Actually, before we go to the asset browser, let's just look at chain mapping so you can see what's going on here. I'm not asking you to change any of this because, again, you can thank me for showing you how this is already done for you already. In here, this is just saying the root of the source matches to the root of the target, and the spine matches the spine, and the head matches the head. Or what we happen to call these the exact same things, or Unreal called them this. The person that made this before us called these the exact same thing, so it makes sense. But otherwise, this is a tedious process of you going in here, all these menus, and manually doing this. It's already done for you, assuming you follow these steps. Now the moment of truth. We go to the asset browser. There's only one animation associated with this right now. We're going to double click it. This is where I always hold my breath. Yeah, look at that. So we have the decapitated body of a metahuman without any clothes doing the custom motion capture that was recorded at 370 J Street. Amazing. Look at that. Now, there may be some differences if I take the offset off again. There are some slight differences, especially the more the animation plays, but it's pretty darn good. Might offset it a little bit more. Look at that. Pretty cool, right? If it's not perfect, that's absolutely fine. It's not going to, once you take the other mesh away, nobody's going to notice. All right. So that looks fantastic. But the animation is not in a usable thing right now. It only works inside this window right now. We can't use it in Unreal yet. What we have to do is we have to export the selected animations. If you had multiples in here, you could export multiples. I only have one right now, so we're just going to export one. Export selected animations. And what that's going to do is it's going to take the animation on the motive avatar, retarget it to the metahuman, and bake it as an animation for the metahuman and its metahuman skeleton. And then we can use it just like any old animation in Unreal. So I'm going to pick my folder I want to put this in and click export. Export. Awesome. So now if I go back to my metahuman that I was working on, we haven't had any disastrous fails yet. Not going. Now we come back to Amelia here. And now we have the animation of this metahuman, along with all of the other animations that came with the metahuman, which are really just kind of a range of motion tests. They're not real animations. But that is there now. So now it's just a matter of putting it on Amelia. So to get this to work, you can't just drop the animation on the body here, how maybe we've done before. We need to do it in Sequencer. So I'm going to open up Sequencer. Actually, let's make a new one. Drag the blueprint into Sequencer. And click on the plus by body. By body, click the plus. Go up to animation. See all animations available to this character. I think it was all the way at the bottom. Motion Builder to Unreal. So now it put the track there, but nothing seems to be happening. Anybody want to take a guess why nothing's happening? It's staring us right in the face right now. What is blocking our animation? When you import a metahuman into Sequencer, it automatically comes with these control rigs, right? Which is what all of these little colorful shapes are. The control rig is blocking our animation. So if I was to take the control rig and delete it, not for the face, but just for the body, notice that the face has its own separate control rig, which is absolutely fine. If I delete that, now, dun 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 dun, and I'm still in animation mode, so I'm going to go back to selection mode in the dropdown. Oh yeah, Amelia. Nice one. And that's how you get custom animation onto a metahuman.
You set the root, like it has like weird like thing onto the X, Y, Z axis earlier. Like instead of it being like
This?
directly on the floor, like it was like this way as the animation. How do we get it so that the root is always just the center of the
Why does it matter?
I guess when I have like another animation that I want to timeline, it's like different.
So, right, I see what you're saying. So that root bone is located at 000. That 000 is where 000 was in the room when you recorded the animation.
Mm.
So if you want to start to blend animations together, you're going to end up with really weird results unless you're in like the exact same spot, right? Which can be very tricky to record.
Mm.
So you could turn off root motion. I don't know if you can turn it off in Sequencer, but if you go into the actual animation itself, well, if I turn it off, it's going to look weird. She's just going to look like she's floating. So in that case, you kind of need to think about blending animations like a video game and keeping in the same location. You could zero it out in Motion Builder.
Mm.
So when before we baked those skeletons, I'm not at that step anymore, but before we baked those skeletons, if I brought back the motive avatar was at 000, but the motion capture wasn't.
Right.
If you took the pelvis or the pelvis or the root of the mocap data and you dragged it back and then you zeroed it out there and characterized it there, that should keep it there. That makes sense.
I'm just worried that if it's like say the motion is like someone running, but you didn't run the place you actually ran, it like the animation still says like they never moved, but the motion is moving. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the character's not moving, but the animation is making them move. Right. So their translation is the same.
Yeah.
It's just the animation moves.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you have two ways to think about it. You could try to avoid that altogether by just recording all transitionary movements as takes or scenes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's record everything as a scene and then there's a camera cut. So there is no blending, right? You don't have to worry about blending at all.
Mm-hmm.
The other way would be to try to match up their home position. Yeah. And not only match up their home position, but also match up like a transitionary pose that makes sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like if you, I don't know, like if you had them run across the room, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then like come back here, and then you want them to go to like an arms cross pose, you should have like the animation come back up and then do the arms cross pose, right?
Uh-huh.
It's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
It would be much better to record it as a single take. But think of it as scenes. You know, this is a camera cut. That I think you'll get much better results doing it that way because the blending is still kind of an interpolation. It's not real motion capture. It's just warping. But in a game, you don't really have any choice because you have to have these distinct animations, right? Because the movement's all controlled by the user. So in a lot of ways, making a film is easier because you don't give your audience any control. Giving the audience control is always setting yourself up for failure. But either one would work. I mean, I think that recording one long 20-minute motion capture take is going to crash the computer and cause disasters. What I would do is I would have my storyboards of what I want to do. Say, okay, I need the motion capture for that scene, and then I know there's going to be a camera cut. That's what I'm going to record all together because it's a single movement that does not have any sort of camera cut or effect that is concealing the change in motion capture. You know what I mean? Like camera cuts, well, close up is a camera cut. You have the character walk behind something in the scene, and that can be a cut even without cutting the camera. If you need, I'm sure you've seen films with like one long shots in them before. There's just like the first movie to ever really do it good was this Orson Welles film called Touch of Evil. And you should look up on YouTube. Like the first 15 minutes of that film are one shot, and it's like a camera on a crane. It's a beautiful, amazing shot from back in like the 1940s. And if you're doing a single shot that needs to be a single shot, then yes, it needs to be a single motion capture take. I guess if it crashed the computer, then it's 15 minutes long. Maybe you can think of clever ways to get it to blend together, but try to think of it as like movements and scenes rather than let's just record a bunch of motion capture. That makes sense. I mean, that's what most people did the first time recording mocap is that we just hit the record button and then we'll do a bunch of disparate stuff that does completely unrelated, right? And then we'll look at it in post. Try to have a little bit more nuance to take when you go into your recording, is what I would say. This mocap for this scene, that's the camera, ideally. But also record some wiggle room stuff too, like record extra stuff that is just like fingers crossed, it's good that we have it sort of stuff too. Yeah, and now we have motion capture on our MetaHuman. Check that out. And now it's just like anything that we've done in the past. There are other things that we can do with, I could still go in here and I'm going to take a break in a second, but I could still go in here. Oops. I could still animate the face. Wow, doing. Well, now she's just going to be blinky face while dancing around, right? I didn't animate it. I just closed her eye. But I could also, I could animate it if I wanted to go in and keyframe things. She just keeps her jaw open the whole time. I could also go back and I could bake this animation back to a control rig. So instead of the control rig just being a pose, the control rig is now this mocap animation. And I can go in and I can modify things afterwards too, just like the control rig in Motion Builder. But now we're doing it on a MetaHuman in Unreal. Pretty neat. All right, we're gonna take a break. I was thinking we're gonna try to leave like a half an hour at the end of class to just talk about final project stuff if need be. If nobody wants to do that, we'll just wrap up early too. But let's come back in a half an hour at 2:20? 2:20 in the room, sitting down, 2:20. And we'll look at some control rig stuff, and I'll see if I can get the facial motion capture to work. Facial motion capture is pretty easy to get to work, but not when you introduce NYU's Wi-Fi network. That's locked down. iPad. It's just getting IP addresses and stuff. Everything's kind of locked down. So we have to use a VPN to do it.
You said earlier with the MetaHuman that there's like a thing like you can scan your face. Is that with like an app that like
Yeah.
exists?
Yeah. It's in Unreal too, so you can 3D scan it. You can use still pictures of your face. If you have this iPad won't do it, but if you have a more recent version, there's an app that you do it on here. It's pretty cool. Like that for the. Did you see the sequel to that Hellblade? You know Hellblade, the game. The one actress that does all the facial motion capture for Unreal. She there was that really good one where her eyes got the flames in them and all the fire came up. It was super kick ass. That one was done with the better version of them. What we're going to look at today. Yeah. That's relatively new too. Okay. Okay. We'll miss you. Oh yeah, it's one of my kids. Mom. Have a good break.